Today I'm gonna read to you the fairy tale called Jorinda and Jorindel. There was once a castle that stood in a deep, gloomy wood, and in a castle lived an old fairy. This fairy could take any shape she pleased. All day long she flew about in the form of an owl or crept about like a cat. But at night she became an old woman again. When any young man came within 100 paces of her castle, he became fixed like a statue and could not move a step till she came and set him free, which he would only do when he had given her his word never to come near again. When any young girl approached, she was changed into a bird, and the fairy would put her into a cage and hung her up in the castle. There were 700 of these cages hanging in the castle, all with beautiful birds in them. Now, there was a girl whose name was Jorinda. She was prettier than all the pretty girls that ever were seen before. A shepherd lad, whose name was Jorindel, was very fond of her, and they were soon to be married. One day they went walking in the wood, so they could be alone. Jorindel said, "We must take care not to go too near to the fairy's castle." It was a beautiful evening. The last rays of the setting sun shone bright through the long stems of the trees upon the green undergrowth beneath, and the turtle doves sang from the tall birches. Jorinda sat down to gaze upon the sun. Jorindel sat by her side, and both felt sad, though they didn't know why. But it was as if they were about to be parted from one another forever. They had wandered a long way and weren't sure which path to take home. The sun was setting fast. Already half of its circle had sunk behind the hill. Jorindel looked behind him and saw through the bushes that they had, without knowing it, sat down close to the old walls of the castle. Then he shrank with fear, turned pale and trembled. Jorinda was singing, but her song abruptly ended with a strange, mournful noise. Jorindel turned to see why, and saw that his Jorinda was changed into a nightingale. An owl with fiery eyes flew 3 times around them, and 3 times screamed, "Too! Too! Too!" Jorindel could not move. He stood fixed as a stone, and could neither weep nor speak, nor stir hand or foot. Night came. The owl flew into a bush, and a moment later the old fairy stepped out, pale and thin, with staring eyes and a nose and chin that almost met one another. She seized the nightingale and went away with it in her hand. Poor Jorindel could not speak. He could not move from the spot where he stood. At last the fairy came back and sang with a hoarse voice, "Till the prisoner is fast and her doom is cast, there stay, oh stay, when the charm is around her and the spell has bound her, run away, away." Then Jorindel found himself free. He fell on his knees before the fairy and begged her to give him back his dear Jorinda, but she laughed at him and said he would never, ever see his love again. Then she went on her way. Jorindel prayed, he wept, he sorrowed, but all in vain. "Alas," he said, "what will come of me?" He could not bear to go back home, so he took work as a shepherd in a strange village near the castle. Many times he walked round and round as close to the hated walls as he dared to go, but he heard and saw nothing of Jorinda. At last he dreamt one night that he found a beautiful purple flower, and that in the middle of it lay a precious pearl. And he dreamt that he plucked the flower and went with it in his hand into the castle, and that everything he touched with it was disenchanted, and that there he found his Jorinda again. In the morning, when he awoke, he began to search over hill and dale for this pretty flower. 8 long days he sought for it in vain, but on the 9th day, early in the morning, he found the beautiful purple flower, and in the middle of it was a dewdrop, as big as a precious pearl. He plucked the flower and travelled day and night till he came again to the castle. Jorindel walked closer and did not become fixed as before, but found that he could approach the doors. He was very glad indeed of this. When he touched the door with the flower, it sprang open. He went in through the court and heard many birds singing. At last he came to the chamber where the fairy sat, with 700 birds singing in the 700 cages. When the fairy saw Jorindel, she was very angry and screamed with rage, but she could not come within 2 yards of him, because the flower in his hand protected him. He looked around at the birds, but alas, there were many, many nightingales. How could he know which was his Jorinda? While he was wondering what to do, he saw that the fairy had taken down one of the cages and was heading out through the door. He ran after her, touched the cage with the flower, and Jorinda stood before him. She threw her arms around his neck, looking as beautiful as ever, as beautiful as when they walked together in the wood. Then he touched all the other birds with the flower, and they turned back into girls again and were free. He took Jorinda home, where they were married, and lived happily together for many, many long, long years.